Means of introduction, I'm Diana, and I'm Human Rights Pulse Community Manager. And the reason for me being here is basically to bring you these conversations with our guest members. So Sarah, in this case, our community members. And the overall aim of what we are doing is to create this safe space for the public and our members to discuss topical issues about human rights. And the nice feature about that is that our members decide freely what they want to speak about, and they always bring topics that they're particularly passionate or interested in. So this is exactly what Sarah is going to do today. So yeah, I would just say let's just kick off. So today, as I said, we have Sarah, who is a student at UCL in economics, philosophy, and politics. But please do not be fooled by the fact that she might only be a student, because she has an incredible wealth of experience, not only with law firms, not only with banking institutions, but notably she has spoken twice at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva about the Syrian situation. Sarah is a dual national, British and Syrian. And she has spoken in the first instance about violence against women and children and the lack of accountability structures that we are facing. And in the second instance, she has spoken about the refugee crisis and the silence of the international community in that respect. But not only that, she has spoken as a special guest for Union of Medical Care and Relief Organization, the UOSSM, in front of an audience of more than 400 people, including the mayor of Geneva. And she has addressed the threat to health workers in Syria and the violation of the International Geneva Convention. So not only Sarah is super qualified to talk to you today, but she's also a terrific speaker, so you will be delighted to hear from her. And the topic
Diana, you're making me blush.
No, don't, please blush, because this is absolutely deserved, please. So I'm sure you will be fascinated by her stories, and we will be addressing today sexual violence in Syria and amongst Syrian refugee camps. So I will stop it here because Sarah will tell you all about it. And yeah, please go ahead, Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Diana. So I wanted to start off first just by mentioning why I picked this topic, and it's because, like Diana said, I'm a dual Syrian British national, but this topic is actually really close to my heart because I feel like it's a topic that's been really underreported on in the press with regards to the Syrian conflict. So just to put things in context, obviously the Syrian war started in March 2011, and there's been an approximately 750,000 people who've been killed, but the real figure is actually estimated to be much, much higher. So when you think about the fact that there's been around 750,000 deaths, 5.6 million Syrian refugees, 6.2 million internally displaced, 12 million in need of humanitarian assistance, you start to see just how big the problem is. So obviously something which isn't kind of contained to the Syrian case, and it's not just contained to the Syrian war, but it's something that's been exacerbated by the war itself, because the structures, any pre-existing legal structures that were present beforehand now been essentially eradicated due to the chaos of war. So this problem of sexual violence in Syria is that it's being not just used as a weapon of war, as was said by the UN Security Council, but it was also being used in loads of different ways, such as weakening political opposition, furthering sectarianism, inducing confessions, and sometimes essentially just to humiliate people, because essentially these people who are perpetrating these acts of sexual violence can't do so. And I think the problem is that there's not enough legal frameworks in place to fight this kind of thing. So in a lot of the Arab countries in Syria and Lebanon, spousal rape isn't recognized as a form of rape. So it's seen as to be something which is okay as long as you're married to the perpetrator. And so this sometimes forces the victims to marry their oppressor, which obviously brings on just another form of trauma to the victim. And I think something which is important to recognize is that sexual violence cases that take place in Syria and in Syrian refugee camps, they're not just standalone cases which can be targeted themselves, but they're more of a wider system of kind of deliberately carried out offenses. So these kinds of things can happen in homes, in medical centers, in checkpoints, in detention centers. So when you actually stop and think about the gravity of the situation, you realize that these women and children who are subjected to these cases of sexual violence are essentially safe. Well, they're not safe anywhere. And so when I was preparing for this, I got in contact with the Union of Mental Care Relief Organization and also with lawyers and doctors for human rights, just to speak to them about their experiences with victims of sexual violence, because they offer like psychotherapy help, psychiatric help, and mental help to these women. And they made me aware of the fact that it's never just that a woman who is exposed to sexual violence is that she's just exposed to sexual violence, but it's that she's usually exposed to the killing of a male relative beforehand, or to some form of blackmail, or to being physically beaten herself beforehand. And I think something which is really, really shocking. Wait, Diana, can you hear me properly?
Sorry?
Can you hear me properly?
Yeah, I can hear you properly. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, the voice just kind of cut out on my end.
Don't worry, don't worry.
So yeah, so like I was saying, is that I think that the point that is most shocking for me is that they're often either made to watch people or to be watched while this is happening. So it's kind of used in kind of mind trick kind of way, like to break the individual. It's not enough just to subject them to sexual violence, but they're kind of subjected to this kind of mind tricks. And something which is, I think, also interesting to note upon is that it's not just, sorry, I feel like the voice isn't very clear. Is it better now?
People are saying that you're a bit echoing. Maybe you can try to put some earphones in if you want. We can have a slight break if you wish. I can hear you perfectly, but if people cannot hear you, maybe might be worth trying with earphones. This is COVID era. We have to adapt.
I knew I'd have technical difficulties. It wouldn't be me if I didn't.
It's always the case. Always.
Is this better?
Yeah. As I said, I can hear you well, but they are saying that they got echo.
Is this still echoey for people? Can they hear me better now?
Can everyone hear better now?
Should I speak a little bit so you guys can know? Yeah? No?
I will just be super silent so you can go.
I'm going to assume that it's good.
Carry on. Okay. Yeah, carry on.
So like I was saying, the problem is that, obviously I just want to also clarify that I recognize that the problem of sexual violence isn't just contained to women, but it happens to all demographics in society. So to men, to children, which I also will touch upon, to the homosexual community, to transgender community. But the reason I wanted to focus on women is because essentially they are the weaker gender in the Syrian society and in Arab culture in general, and so they're more exposed to this kind of act. But something which I came across in all my research is that the sexual violence that happens, it isn't just kind of contained to women who are vulnerable in the traditional sense. So for example, women from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who might not have a stable home or a stable accommodation, for example. But because the perpetrators of the sexual violence are usually hold all the power, so they're either government militia or government officials or international security forces, intellectual security forces, because they hold this kind of power, they can kind of use it to manipulate their own kind of aims. So one of the stories which I came across, which was quite jarring, was the fact that there was a woman who was very wealthy, and she was specifically targeted by a government official, and she was asked to engage in a sexual relationship with him. And when I'm seeing comments that the sound isn't so good. Oh, oops.
Okay, let me try. You know what?
I don't know if it's on my end or...
Let's see, if I speak, do you still hear echo? Zidane, for example, if I speak, is it still not so good, or is it any better?
I'm
Maybe it's
not
on my
hearing. I can hear you properly.
I don't know. And now you blocked. Okay, let's see. How do I mute myself? Okay, I will try. It's not my laptop, unfortunately. Now I think your connection was a bit lost, but you know what? I will try to put my volume down so that it doesn't echo. Only when Sarah
Is this
speaks.
better now? I think now I'm clearer.
So only Sarah's echoing. Let's try again. I will still try to lower my volume, and we can just, like, anyways, people do not worry. We will try to address all the technical problems. I will provide you with summaries and stuff, but let's just try this again. I will just lower my volume, and so Sarah can speak clearly, and hopefully no more echo is going to be there. Let's try. Okay, let's try it now.
Okay,
1, 2, 3.
so hopefully
Shall we
now
go?
the echo is gone. I've switched to 4G, so hopefully that will solve the problem.
Sorry?
So like I was saying, so she was approached, this woman.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can't hear me?
I can. It's good.
Okay.
Okay,
So
yeah,
like
it's good.
I was saying, this woman was approached by the government official, and okay. So the woman was approached by a government official. I think there's a lag. So the woman was approached by the government official who asked her to engage in sexual acts with him. And when she declined on doing so, she was approached the next day. She had a knock on her door, and she was dragged to prison the next day. And she was falsely accused with an allegation. I can hear you, yeah.
I think it's all good now. Do you still hear me lagging? Oh, I cannot hear you anymore. Welcome to technology. Yeah, just go on. Oh no, I cannot hear you anymore. I'll just wait a little bit here. Can you guys see me? At least, because I have Sarah. Okay, I can see you again. Yes.
Okay, I think I've connected back again. Is this better?
Okay. Yeah, for me it's super better. Don't worry at all. Even if we had a small problem, that's fine. But I can see you better now and hear you better.
Okay.
Go. Okay.
So like I was saying. Okay, I think this is good now. So, like I was saying, so this woman who was approached to engage in the sexual acts with this government official, when she declined, the next day she was dragged to prison with a false accusation, with a false allegation. And when she was in the interrogation room, she was told that the way that she knew how she could leave prison, and all she had to do is accept the request that she was given the day before. So in this kind of case, you've got multiple layers of corruption, multiple layers of issues within the country. So for example, the fact that this government official can just imprison whoever he wants without cause. He can take whoever he wants out of prison without cause. He can force women into partaking in these kinds of acts. I think this just shows the kind of extent of the problems that are taking place. And then when you consider, so this is inside Syria, and then when you consider the situation outside Syria and Syrian refugee camps, for example, I mean, Syrians have a distinct accent compared to Lebanon, compared to Lebanese, for example. So a Syrian refugee woman in Lebanon who doesn't necessarily have as many legal rights or as many civil rights, they're automatically seen to be vulnerable, or automatically seen to be kind of as an easy target, because they know that they have no employability rights, for example. So for a woman who may be illegally working to provide sustenance and food for her family, if she is exposed to a form of sexual violence while she's in the workplace, who's she going to turn to? Because the fact is that she's working illegally anyway. So who's going, like, is she going to go to someone and say to them, I'm working illegally, but I got sexually assaulted in the workplace, for example? And so, as you can see, there's so many layers to the issue. There's so many kind of aspects that you can come at it from, that it becomes just so much more difficult to think of a solution for the problem. And I actually wanted to just speak about one particular case which really resonated with me, because I mean, there's loads of cases that we could touch upon, but the one case that really touched me was a case of a woman named Amal. And in Arabic, Amal means hope. And when Amal is telling her story, she talks about how all hope that she had in life was ripped away from her because of her experiences. So Amal was in Aleppo, and this was towards the start of the Syrian Revolution. She was going out to the protest, to the peaceful protest. And she was targeted by pro-government officials who knocked on her door and told her to come with them. When she asked them where they would be going, they told her you'd only be gone for a few hours. A few hours turned into a few months, and she was illegally detained and sexually assaulted. And when she describes her experiences, she talks about the way in which, first of all, she was beaten. So she was beaten almost to her breaking point, but not enough to tip her over the edge, just enough to make her go a little bit crazy. And then she was sexually assaulted by a group of men. So they took it in turns, one after the other. When one got tired, the next came in. And then she was thrown to the side. And when she was thrown to the side, it wasn't over, because she was made to watch as a child was sexually assaulted in front of her. And she talks about how she screamed, and in fact, she screamed louder when the child was being sexually assaulted than when she was being sexually assaulted. But no one came to their help. And now she's managed to escape Syria. She's in the Zaatari refugee camps and in Jordan. But she talks about how to this very day, she still doesn't know whether this child survived, whether this child is still alive, whether they managed to make it out of the detention center. And so I think this story is really shocking, because it highlights how it's not just a standalone case. I mean, Amal was brave enough to come out and speak about her story, but the reality is many women don't have the courage to speak about their experiences. The reality is many women are too scared to come out, and not only because there's the fear that they won't be believed, but there's also the fear of their culture and their community's reaction. Because like I said before, the problem of sexual assault in Syria isn't contained to Syria, but it's exacerbated because of the culture because there's often the kind of belief that if a woman is sexually assaulted, she's become either dirty or impure or tainted or used. Used is often a term that I hear quite a lot. And so they don't have this kind of motivation to come out, because often the cost of them coming out is more than what they will gain. So, like I said, when I was speaking to the organizations, when I was speaking to OSEM, the Union of Medical Care Relief Organizations, they made it, they made me aware of the fact that a lot of the sexual assaults that happen in Turkey, in Reyhanli, actually occur within the local organizations themselves. So, for example, a non-profit organization may be providing food or, I don't know, educational support or healthcare support or something to this family. And at the same time, while they'll be doing this, they'll also be sexually assaulting the women or the children. And so when you're stuck in this situation where you are literally at the mercy of your helpers, you become kind of torn, because you think, first of all, if I speak out, who's going to believe me? And you have the second, it's like a double-edged sword. Like first of all, who will believe me? And second of all, if I speak out, who's going to provide for my children? Who will give them food? Who will give them education? So I think this links in really nicely to the fact that there's the problem with speaking out, but there's also the problem with the lack of international support and international aid to the situation, which means that the women don't have an alternative. So this actually brings me on to like the points that I was considering on what can the international community do? What can we do to kind of mitigate the scenario? So actually, when I was first thinking about this, my automatic naive self was like, we need to find a way to stop the sexual assault from occurring. We need to find a way to make sure we find all these sexual assaulters and we hold them accountable. But then when I started thinking about it more pragmatically, I realized that essentially this is very, very complex thing to do, and it's not pragmatic at all. But something that we can do is that there can be increased education for the women. So, for example, something that's been done is that women are given educational classes in refugee camps of their self-worth, to give them self-confidence, to give them the knowledge that they didn't ask for it, or they're not dirty, or they're not impure, and things like this, which encourage them to speak out. And obviously, after they speak out, I mean, there's still millions of other problems to tackle. But when they speak out, it's like you're almost one step closer. And then after they speak out, there's the need for kind of more support, because when they speak out, they need to be given the reassurance that they're not speaking out at the cost of their family's sustenance, for example. And on another point, I was also thinking something along the forms of legal reform. So, for example, the fact that spousal rape isn't recognized as a form of sexual assault in Syria or in Lebanon, for example, and I'm sure in other Arab countries as well. I think this poses a major problem, because a lot of people think they can fix the issue of sexual assault by just marrying their children off, marrying their women off to their assaulters. And the final thing which I was thinking is the need for women to be included in the conversations towards peace. So like I said at the start of this kind of conversation, the sexual assault obviously isn't contained to Syria or the Syrian case, but it's exacerbated by the presence of war. And so obviously reaching a point of peace will hopefully reduce the number of sexual assaults that take place. But the way in which we reach peace needs to involve women. Women need to be part of the conversation. I mean, they're on the receiving end of a lot of the kind of victimization, and so it's essential that there's a kind of meaningful effort for them to become part of the conversation, and so that their input into reaching peace is kind of taken into account. So I'll give you a rest of my voice. I feel like
yeah, you should take a break. That was a very, very intense topic. No, but I see that people are we are getting comments in here, but no, there's so much. No, absolutely, no, not at all. That was brilliant, but there's so much to say and so much to ask that. As we always say, whenever we do these poll sessions, we always tackle very hot issues that are such a fertile ground for debate that is so hard to tackle them in 1 hour time or whatever. But first of all, I have one question. So I also saw that someone said, I assume they're from Syria. We are definitely against marriage in this case. Maha, I assume that you're from Syria. I apologize if you're not, but because you were Sarah, you were speaking about the legality of spousal rape and people selling off spouses to their aggressors. But in this case, you're saying we are definitely against marriage. But besides before delving into the legal reality of things, do you think so culture is definitely a problem, but who is supposed to be the person in charge of educating those women? So for example, we are accustomed of instances of people, the white savior complex, for example, or the import of democratization in Eastern or Middle Eastern countries, and we are debating philosophically and ethically whether that is right or not. But here, obviously, there is a cultural problem that is tied to fundamental human rights. Then who do you think should be in charge of doing those educational programs? Do you think that people from the West should actually go there and be like, once again, import those human rights standards that were created in 1919? Or how do you think that should go about in terms of those educational programs?
So I think obviously ideally the situation would be that the governments themselves would educate the people, but obviously since they're they're part of the perpetrators, this can't be done. I see your point about obviously there's been criticism about the West importing kind of their values, but I think the thing to notice here is that these values of human rights aren't Western values, they're just human values. And so,
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
the decency not to sexually assault someone hasn't originated from the West.
Yeah.
It's you know, just an innate part of a decent human being. And so I don't think you need to be from the UK or from the US to be able to teach someone that if they are raped, it's not their fault, or to teach someone that rape is bad. I think the problem is there's a lot of good people on ground in the Middle East who want to be mobilized and who want to help, but don't know the way in which they can do so. And so I think if existing on-ground organizations kind of come together to kind of try to create a project in which these women can be educated or these children can be educated, I think that could be a way forward. But I think it's really important to recognize that I think this would be a different situation to, for example, the West importing a new regime style, for example, because this is more related to fundamental human rights, which, like I said before, I don't think originated in the West, but is more
Absolutely.
spread out.
No, I 100% agree. The here, like, I was very careful in saying what I was saying because, of course, as I said, those things are tied to fundamental human rights, which are neutral. There's nothing
Exactly.
political about human rights. So absolutely 100%. But then the problem comes when you analyze, because human rights, of course, exist in a political and cultural framework. So then everything that you just said exists, and
Sure.
it becomes exacerbated by that shame and guilt that is so difficult to eradicate. And then, of course, as you said, it's not only Syria, is the patriarchal culture in general that is once again exacerbated in conflict zones. So it's very, very difficult. But once again, yeah, I also absolutely agree that is the ground organization, the government that should provide support for field organizations to then educate their own people as it should be. So I'm sorry, people are saying things, but it's a bit difficult for me to keep track of those. Yeah, indeed, saying that the West should, exactly. So me and Kamed is saying that the West should educate those people is quite orientalist. That was exactly what I was trying not to say, and I was trying to put the debate in terms of, we are talking about human rights and who should educate then, who should provide that vital education to have that shift in culture. And as Sarah was saying, it is the local government and the field organization that should educate their own people. So absolutely, we are not talking about West importation of ideals, which is literally what I was trying not to say, but I'm sorry if it came across the other way. But here, actually, something that comes to my mind as well, since we are talking about the importance about either local organizations or international organizations and NGOs and so on. Do you think, Sarah, that we are shifting from, we are actually putting now more emphasis on NGOs in terms, even legally speaking, that we did in the past? So in the past, the focus was more typically legalistic, the nation state, international law as such. Do you think that there is hope for placing more enforceability tools and just legal rights in terms of enforceabilities on those organizations? How do you view the scenario in that respect?
So I think the sound kind of cut out a little bit. So just to confirm, you're asking if more responsibility is being placed on NGOs, if we're shifting towards
Yeah,
that
yeah,
direction? Yeah.
yeah. So for example,
I think
say
so,
we
to be
have
honest.
sorry, can you hear me,
I think there
Sarah?
was a lag.
There was a lag.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, no, so yeah, I was saying, so yeah, do you think that do we have more responsibility on NGOs at the
Yeah, I can hear
moment?
you.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lag. And Maha again is saying, so local NGOs working more than international NGOs as session
I
or
think
field
we
work.
are definitely going.
Oh, there's a lag. Oh no. Let's just wait a moment because I think there is a problem in connection once again. Yes, you do have more responsibility. Yeah, indeed.
Okay, is this better now?
I think so. Yeah. I can see you better now. So, and Maha again, Maha is saying, yes, you do have more
Okay,
responsibilities.
so
And Zidane is saying, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, so I'm going to agree with Maha and Zidane. And I was going to say, I think definitely there's being more responsibility placed. I don't think it's even been a kind of conscious shift. I think it's been more of an unconscious shift, is that in that governments have been taking less responsibility themselves. They've been prioritizing more kinds of domestic issues that they deem to be of higher importance. And so naturally, there needs to be something or somebody kind of taking responsibility, and naturally NGOs, who are usually like either volunteer based, usually taking on this load themselves. So for example, I know in Turkey, for example, the Union of Medical Care and Relief Organization takes on a lot of responsibility themselves into kind of dealing with these kinds of situations that we were speaking about beforehand. And a lot of them is kind of either self-funded or they find their own funding. So I think definitely there's this shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And indeed, also our spectators are having quite a sort of discussion among themselves. But yeah, we agree. And yeah, we are on the same page. I'm so sorry that there has been a lag between what I was saying before, what Sarah was saying, and what Zidane, Maha, Dana, I think. We were all saying exactly the same thing. And I think the emphasis here was also on the local NGOs, which Maha was emphasizing. But here I have again another, I wouldn't call it objection, but a hint for reflection. And once again, exactly to state, to be against that Western culture importing ideals in the East. We're talking here about NGOs, be it international or local, but we are talking primarily about international law. So we've talked about responsibility to protect, which ties into everything that we just said, and the obligations under international law that Syria has and other countries have against the violations in Syria. But I think is more of a comment than a question. And then, Sarah, if you want to comment back on that, please feel free to do so. I think that we have a problem, not only a cultural problem in terms of we need more active education that has to be done locally at the local sphere, but the international legal regime, the international standards of the rule of law are, in my opinion, flawed at the moment, exactly because that very regime stems from the nation state that emerged from the Western civilization that put all the emphasis on national sovereignty. So Syria, of course, has national sovereignty, and there is a lack of accountability locally, but also internationally, because Syria can enact its own laws. And if Syria says that spousal rape is not recognized, then you have the problem of selling people to their own aggressor, and so on and so forth. So I think that even more so, to counter this problem of the Western problem, nation states, the international legal framework that is outdated, we should put more powers in the hands of international organizations and local organizations, and they should be working together so as to strengthen that very international rule of law. And then, of course, that coupled with the educational programs. But that is very hard because we cannot solve diplomatic relations by clicking just like that, obviously, because then again, we have the political will, we have the cultural aspects of everything, and it is also very hard to say where to intervene, what to say, when it is ethically right to do so or not.
Yeah, and when you overstep your line.
Exactly, where you overstep your line. So yeah. I don't know if you wanted to say something about a responsibility to protect or anything, or if not, don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Just
Actually, I think this is really interesting. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned responsibility to protect, because obviously responsibility to protect, for those who don't know, is like part of international law, in which obviously each state has their own national sovereignty, but there's also an international responsibility for other states to assist states in upholding citizens' human rights, and then when this fails, for the states to intervene. So obviously in the case of Syria, I mean, even if we take aside the fact of sexual violence, the atrocities that have been committed in Syria have ticked all the boxes for allowing other states to intervene. But I think the problem is that the power to implement responsibility to protect lies within the Security Council. And obviously the Security Council has the veto power. And so as much as we don't like to believe it, or as much as people try to kind of deny this fact, people, even within international organizations, act for their own country's interests. So I think it's difficult to separate these 2 points from each other. And so, for example, the US may intervene in Libya, for example. So in fact, when they intervened in Libya, they intervened under the responsibility to protect. But the death toll in Syria and the atrocities that have committed are even higher than they were in Libya, yet this has not been implemented. So I think just considering these two cases side by side, we get to see the way in which international law is kind of tainted by national interests of the powerful in the world.
Absolutely, that the Security Council absolute veto is a real problem, and it will be. Now, once again, I do not want to say anything about, also because I do not have a specific stance on it. It's two-faced and too complicated to have a specific stance of it, because too many layers overlap. But the veto is a problem, because there is this political will that overlaps, and of course there are national interests that are at play. That is just undeniable. It would be it would just be unrealistic to forget about those. But then again, sometimes I feel a bit discouraged even when I think about the European Court of Human Rights and the judgment that it delivers. We have we don't need to go to Syria to say that Syria is bad or Syria is in violation of human rights.
Definitely not.
The UK, for example, UK has taken ages to implement specific line of judgments. And when you have a specific country that is reluctant to implement something that is legally binding upon it, what do you do? Because then again, you have those political interests and national interests at play. And this is why I was saying that this international rule of law standard should be definitely should be put higher up, because it becomes futile to have those many institutions that work tirelessly towards upholding human rights standard, but then they're not enforced.
I agree.
So yeah, very complex. I wish I could solve that overnight, but I cannot.
All of us do. I was actually going to also mention the fact that there's not enough incentive as well to uphold. So for example, even if a state ratifies a UN agreement, for example, with regards to some form of human rights, they know that should they go against this ratified, for example, agreement, nothing's going to happen. There's nothing will hold them. Also another point which kind of agrees with your point about increasing the priority of international law, and that there needs to be some form of consequence to incentivize countries to actually honor the commitments that they've made.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I'm going to make a bit of a bitter comment here. It seems that the most enforceable consequence here are financial sanctions, and not even there. So not even their financial sanctions are always enforced. But it's a bit sad to say that whenever nations or governments are threatened with money being taken away from their budgets, then only then they're like, okay, we're going to comply now. Let me just browse, because here we have people saying, I'm really sorry that I've been a bit unable to see all the messages flagging in here, but I think we pretty much. So for example, Maha Atasi here is saying that here in our world organizations, we are doing awareness for kids for education. That is brilliant. That is really fantastic. it's actually like for me, being the Western person that I am, is really nice to see this and to talk with, like, to have this conversation and to see that something is being done in the local fields. And then, do we have other question? We observe and notice in, yeah, increase of suicide cases every day. Yeah. And we have, yeah. Yeah, Iran has not responded to any financial sanctions. Yeah, that was exactly my point. So even when we're talking about financial sanctions, not even there we have compliance all of the time. So it's very, very tricky in that respect. Maha again is saying we are doing awareness for suicide, that which is.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? I can hear you. Do you hear me?
Oh, yeah, because I was going to say,
With a
even
lag.
in the case of Syria, I mean, Caesar sanctions have been implemented. Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Good. There is a lag.
Yeah, so as I was saying, in the case of Syria, for example, Caesar sanctions have been implemented, but this doesn't seem to have deterred much of the Syrian activity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely what I was saying. Do you think, what do you think about a hybrid tribunal or an ad hoc tribunal for Syria? Do you agree with that? Or in general, the setup of ad hoc tribunals for...
You mean in the international community? You mean, like, for example, in the West?
Yeah, no, for example, as the ICTY, ICC, so the setup of an international tribunal. I think recently...
it was done in Germany, right?
Yeah, and also the Dutch have said something pretty recently, I think a week ago, about enforcing sanctions against Syria. But again, I'm not an international law expert, so I cannot do a lecture about it. But do you agree as a concept with the establishment of an ad hoc tribunal to enforce and held accountable the Syrian government, for example, or whatever government for that matter, in the international community? Can you hear me? Oh, I think the connection was lost.
Can you hear me? Sorry, the internet.
I can hear you now.
Okay, I can. Okay, we're back. Yeah, so you were asking about the tribunals. I was going to say, I think they're a good idea in concept. I mean, recently in Germany, I think they held a high Syrian government official. They put him on trial. And I think it became it was big in the news because it was like the first time that a Syrian government official was being held accountable for the injustices that had been committed. So I think it's actually a good idea in principle, and that it actually brings some kind of hope, because the accountability within Syria itself, I don't think seems like it's going to be happening anytime soon. So I think it brings hope to the victims that their perpetrators or their attackers or their oppressors will actually be held accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just reading through other questions that are coming. So Nadi is saying, who gets action? For example, rich countries wouldn't have much to fear as they control the global economy. Can you comment on the human rights impact of financial sanctions? So Nadia, as we were saying, you're absolutely right. Of course, there is that political and economic interplay in the same way as you also have in the Security Council with the absolute veto, because you have the permanent members controlling and once again, when they have the power to veto whatever decision is made, and the money resources are allocated in not only different but unequal ways. So of course there will be countries who simply do not care. They do not implement financial sanctions because they either have enough money or do not fear other retaliation or whatever that might happen. So this is where my comment that I said beforehand ties in the terms of, we have this very nice international law regime that sets out obligations and sanctions, be it financial or not, but specifically financial. So we are tackling the budget, but then they're not effective. So the problem is that, exactly as you say, because there are those economic and political power plays, apparently the international regime is not effective. So there is room for reform here in that sense. Now, once again, I'm not an international law expert, so I cannot provide you with more than that, and I'm sorry for that. Sarah, if you want to say something about this, please be free. I mean, this is your thing. Now I took the tangent on my comment of before, but please.
The connection actually cut out.
Here people are also... You cannot hear me anymore.
Now I can hear you. Now I can hear you.
Okay.
But I missed the question.
No, so we were just, I was talking with Nadi about the ineffectiveness of financial sanctions, because of course we have the economic reality of global powers, and the political and economic power plays are set up in such a way that certain countries are not even scared of the financial sanctions because they control the budget of whatever organization, or they simply do not fear retaliation in that sense. So I was once again arguing that there is a very nice regime in theory, but then when we tackle the effectiveness in practice, then we have a discrepancy there. And then Zidane is saying regarding Syria, sanctions should apply on Russia and Syria for not only on Syrian people. Yeah, I mean, of course we could debate financial sanctions and sanctions in general for a very long time, and I absolutely agree, but I think that this is a bit we are going a bit stepping over the line of what the original topic was. But no, absolutely, maybe we can hold another session and tackle specifically financial sanction under the human rights, the international law regime. So if people that are listening to us right now are interested, we can consider having a specific session on financial sanction separately. And then Amin Kamed, those sanctions hurt the citizens of the countries.
Yeah, I was going to mention this.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, of the sanction on Iraq in the 90s, they starved the Iraqi people. Yeah. Caesar Lamy was similar. And then Mr. Will is saying that independent ad hoc tribunal will be very ideal. The only problem is a question of practicality. Yeah, with all the permanent 5 members go for this. If not either, yeah, again, we have the veto problem. So how do we establish? And also, I think here there is again a philosophical and what was the word?
There's the question.
No, it was not. It was a
I was just going to say there's the question of whether, like, for example, so with the veto, with the permanent veto for the 5 members of the Security Council, whether there should be like a separate committee itself, which is kind of seem to be neutral. So whether this would be a way to kind of tackle the issue of kind of either subjectivity or biasness or national interest, which I think is interesting.
Then again, I would say, once again, I absolutely agree with that. We would have to modify the treaties then, and the legal mechanism that regulates the UN.
Exactly, all goes down to practicality and to reform. And I mean, every time you think of a scenario that could kind of could almost begin to chip away at the injustices that take place, or the problems in the legal reform, you realize that in the first place anyway, you need to go back to the Security Council, which has the ability to make these reforms. So then you're stuck back from square one.
Yeah, exactly, you're back to square one. Yeah, which I think is the main critique at the moment in the international legal arena. So yeah, totally. I think about this every day, so it's very interesting. It's a bit disappointing, but it's also very interesting in terms of how the law is a dynamic instrument, I think, at least personally. So we should never, in treaties, so we should never regard a treaty such as the UN Charter or whatever as a monolithic instrument that exists there because after the war we came up with this nice organization for peace, but then society, culture, economic reality, recession, whatever, we are evolving. So And maybe in that respect, we could think about a faster mechanism for treaty review. But then again, you have the problem of you don't want to be so quick on reforming human rights standards, because we took so long to get in there that you don't want to get that stripped very easily.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's complicated. Sorry, I'm reading once again. There are more comments, and I like the fact that our audience is commenting a lot. So I like this engagement. I like that. I'm so sorry that we're not in person. I would love to have you here and just have a chat with you instead of reading off a screen, which is so cumbersome. But let me just, yeah, there needs to be a mechanism to detach law from politics. Yes, yes. But how we get from here to there is the big question. Absolutely. Unfortunately, there is always a way a way of getting out of the sanctions. Yes, and I think, Sarah, you mentioned corruption. Widespread corruption is a problem. So then, even if when you have sanctions, you have institutional corruption that plays a role in that. So,
and you have the fact that the corruption can be passed down to the citizens. Like I can't remember who mentioned it, but someone mentioned it. So even, I mean, a lot of people now are saying that in Syria the hyperinflation could be linked to Caesar law. I mean, whether this is true, whether it's not, I'm not an expert on this, but I think it's a prediction that's been made by a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so complex. Once again, I'm just reading. I think here we were back to the ad hoc. Also, I have, like, I'm on my phone, so it's incredibly difficult to squeeze in and see what people are saying from this tiny tiny screen. Uniting for Peace resolution is a precedent to bypass the permanent veto through the UN once again, but it's very political and practical now. Yeah, there is no political space for it. The issue is under the current UN structure, we cannot detach. And yes, yeah, once again, we have a problem with the UN law as such, so the legal regime regulating the United Nations. But then again, I remember AXA actually, I think, was saying that the UN is not perfect, but is there to help us not achieve the most horrible of circumstances. So of course, whenever we are dealing with global crisis, there is never a perfect solution, because there will always be multiple factors playing in. So of course, the UN is subject to criticism, but the UN, I think she said something of, the UN is not there to be to make us live in a perfect world, but a better world.
Better world.
So we can. There's.
I was just going to say, like, I definitely agree with the sentiment. I mean, a few months ago, I started going through this phase, and I was just thinking, like, the UN obviously is meant to be there to promote peace, but there's so much injustice and so much war and violence in the world. But then when I thought about it from, like, the flip side of the coin, I realized that, okay, the UN isn't a perfect institution. Of course, there's corruption. Of course, there's bureaucracy in every international organization. But when you think that, in fact, what would the world be without the UN? Would it be a better place? Would it be the same? Of course, it wouldn't be the same. I mean, whether it's even 1%, I mean, I think we need to give the UN more than 1% credit. But let's say it was only 1% better than a world without the UN. I think the fact that it provides just a tiny bit of hope for people that, let's say, are in those countries who are being oppressed. The fact that the UN is there to, at least in theory, have these kind of international standards that countries should adhere to, I think that's something that we should give the UN credit for.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes. As I was saying, we're not here to bash the UN. We are grateful for the UN. You know, there's always room for reform, but absolutely, as you just said. I think people here are very happy for us to be hosting a financial. Okay, so we're definitely gonna host a financial economic sanction, a special session. So we will, I will take care of that. I think we have now some more sessions planned, but definitely I will put that on the agenda. So if you follow us, once again, this very talk is gonna be soon published on YouTube, so follow us there. And we have our usual channels. We have Instagram, we have LinkedIn, we have Facebook, so you will always be be notified there whenever, in due time, of course, whenever we're planning a session and about which specific topic. So financial sanctions, I'll just put it there, and we're going to host one. And yeah, I'm being mindful of the time here. It's 5 minutes to go. Sarah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So I think we had a brilliant discussion, and I'm so glad that people joined in, and I'm so sorry at the same time that I wasn't able to address everything properly. But as I always say, after every session, this talk is going to first be posted on IGTV, so you can just watch it at whatever time it is comfortable for you, and then if you're one of our community members, a summary of what we said is going to be posted on our post channel, so do not worry about that at all. And yeah, I think I could stay here and talk about this for hours, but maybe people need to go for dinner or whatever. So I feel like I don't want to hold anyone's hostage in our chat. But Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Diana.
That
Thank
was
you for
beautiful.
hosting me.
Oh no, I'm sorry that we had our technical problems.
No,
but,
I'm pretty sure it was on my end. So honestly,
nah. Don't worry. For sure. Maybe this house is too echoey. Maybe I don't know. But we will, like, next time I will adapt, and I will be very, like, I need to modernize my digital tools. So you're saying no, they're not hungry.
They're not hungry.
Yeah, I could cook pasta for all of you, and I would love, actually, I would love to host a nice dinner for all of you. Maybe in the future, let's see where Human Rights Pulse is going. Maybe
definitely put it on the agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, once again, thank you. And yeah, I think we should just, like, close it here.
Yeah,
thanks everyone.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
My pleasure. Bye.
Bye.